Welcome to the OrionX Download. This is a podcast where we discuss big ideas and big trends in high technology. Hello and welcome again to the OrionX Download. I'm Dan Olds here with my co-host Shahin Khan. Hey Shahin, how you doing?
Excellent, Dano. How are you?
Not bad. We are getting to our belated SC17 roundup.
Well, we were going to do a preview, but we probably at this point should do a post view.
Yeah, I would go ahead and do the post view. I think the time for the preview is come and gone.
But we would sound so prophetic if we did a preview now.
We would. We would sound very good. And there were some interesting things that happened. One of the most interesting, I think, that got the most general press was China pulling ahead of the U.S. in the latest top 500 systems list.
That's right, and not without a little bit of controversy, right?
Yes. Just to level set everybody, half a year ago on the last list, the U.S. had 169 systems on it, and China had 160. And now China has more.
Way more, like 202.
Yeah, and the U.S. has, I think, 143, and then followed by Japan, Germany, France, and the U.K. Distant following.
That's right.
So what does this really mean? A lot of people painted this to mean that the U.S. has fallen way behind in HPC horsepower and in world dominance of computing. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a few things going on here. One is that China is absolutely systematically investing in science and technology and supercomputing. They've been building their own supercomputers. Increasingly, some of the chips are indigenous. Not much of the software, but certainly at the hardware front, they're doing a lot more and more, right? So I think given that they are so systematically investing, when they are then ahead by as much as they are, there is a bit of a truth in there that you have to acknowledge. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, a lot of the systems that they counted are not really HPC systems.
There's kind of a feel that they took any cluster and said, go out and run LinPack on it, and if you got something that'll hit the 500 list, get it on the list.
Yeah, and given that it was such a big jump, you have to assume that it was probably a little bit of a concerted effort. But it's always been a bit of a controversy in top 500 whether the systems that you're counting are really doing HPC workloads, right?
Yeah.
If it's being used for transaction processing or data warehousing or whatnot, those really don't qualify as HPC. So when you count them, it leaves a bad taste in people's mouth. But
it does.
On the other hand, it could do it if you were to do it. So, in my mind, the rules allow it, and as long as the rules allow it, it's kind of hard to fault people for wanting to win based on the rules.
True, but if you applied those same rules, and if the U.S. And others had the same intentions, imagine what sort of top 500 placement Amazon and Google would have. They would own the entire list.
Of course, absolutely. And to the extent that they count them, that would be great. But of course, many of our big sites really don't care whether or not they show up on the top 500.
Yeah.
Sometimes because they just don't care. Sometimes they don't want to go through the work. But absolutely, if you take the cloud providers, the U.S. would be way ahead. And for all I know, they could even beat the top performance right now.
I would imagine if you took our exascalers that they could probably double or triple all of the performance on the list.
It's hard to
just as
imagine
a swag.
That people exactly. It's hard to imagine that folks like at Amazon and Google and IBM and Microsoft and these big cloud providers couldn't do a really good number if they put their mind to it.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, number one still is a Chinese system, as it was last time.
Yep, and so is number two as well.
Not much change in the top 10.
A little bit. The one from Switzerland, they doubled up their performance. I'm not going to pronounce this right. Pisdiant,
I think.
doubled up their performance by moving to V100s, and so they got to the third spot. And Geico from Japan is a new entry at number 4, and that beat out Titan.
Right. So the Swiss guys just upgraded their NVIDIA accelerators, GPUs.
Yes.
And that seems to be the method of choice to get on the top 500 is to use these accelerators. And NVIDIA is a variety, and this company Pezi in Japan actually is showing up in the top 10.
Yeah.
And of course, the number 1 Taiyu Lite system, I think, has its own architecture, so I don't think that one is...
Not really an accelerator.
Yeah, exactly. I think each chip is its own kind of an accelerator-looking thing.
Yeah. It's kind of reminiscent of the old Cell processor, the Cell broadband engine.
Then there's the Green 500, and that's measuring performance per watt, energy used, and the number 1 system on that list is at RIKEN, the Japanese institute. This is a zeta scalar system made up of Xeons and InfiniBands and the Pezi accelerator, and that comes in at 17 gigaflops per watt.
Then there's a HPCG benchmark, the conjugate gradient, which is trying to establish a bit of a lower bound on performance. RIKEN is again number 1 for that one, with 0.6 petaflops, basically 602 gigaflops. Mm-hmm. And then there's another one called Graph 500, where you try to do some level of graph analytics. And RIKEN, again, is number 1 in that. So that also tells you something, is that if you optimize for a more varied workload, you're probably going to have to give up a little bit of top 500 to do so. And RIKEN is doing it, and that's the K supercomputer, if I'm not mistaken. So that's really, really nice. Yeah.
The vendor rankings have changed a fair amount in the top 500. IBM, the overall broad measure, 94.2% of the total said number of 500 systems are now using Intel processors, which is slightly up from 92.8, but I'd call that a pretty healthy market share.
Yeah, definitely.
And IBM Power processors are next at 14 systems, which is down from 21 systems as some of these old systems come off the list.
Of course, IBM took a big hit when they sold their x86 business to Lenovo. So at this point, all of their entries are the Power architecture, and they're trying to build that back up.
And HPE has the lead in the total number of installed supercomputers at 122, nearly 25%. Lenovo follows with 81 systems. Inspur is rising up with 56 systems. Cray now has 53 systems, which is 4 down from where they were 6 months ago.
And still very impressive, given that they're the smallest player at this point.
Sugon came up, and in general, the Chinese vendors came up. With Lenovo breaking that trend down a few systems.
So I want to add that I just looked it up, and the RIKEN system is indeed number 10 on the top 500, and it is a Fujitsu K supercomputer, which is a Spark 64.
And that's been around for a while.
It's been around for a while. That's right, and it's held up really well, especially as number 1 for 3 of the 4 benchmarks. So what else happened at SC17?
Oh, let's see. We had a lot of news that came out about various things, one of which is Oak Ridge is getting ready to push out the Summit supercomputer for 2018. And what I hear in the rumor mill is that they're delivering as quickly as humanly possible, and that is going to be, Summit is going to be around 200 petaflops when completed next summer. So that will make it the biggest system in the world.
Unless it's upstaged.
Unless something else comes. Yeah.
Right. So next year would be really exciting. Now, what is the architecture of the Summit?
IBM Power.
Now, IBM was, I think, previewing under NDA during SC17 their Power 9 system, which has since been announced.
Yes. And that's a pretty formidable chip and a pretty formidable system. They're gearing it really hard, pushing it really hard for AI, which I think I wouldn't want customers to be confused and think that this is just an AI system, because it's a damn good general processing system, particularly if you have anything that's accelerated.
Right. But I understand that. I think in general, if you look at what IBM is doing with AI, with Watson, with data science, with DSX and SPSS, and what they're doing with analytics, they've been driving that for more than a decade now.
Yeah.
And with basically cognitive computing, as they've termed it, with cloud, which is kind of part of the soft layer strategy. And then while they're doing that, they're pushing on quantum computing, and we're going to come back to that later. That if you think of it as like that, then it makes sense that they would position this strongly for AI.
It does, but I think that this is a general HPC high-end enterprise system that by pushing it too hard for AI, if they do that they are limiting its market.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that you have to pick your sweet spot and then trust the customers to go around it as they would. And I think, if you reverse engineer their thinking, it seems like they figure if they position it for AI, all the HPC stuff will happen anyway.
Well,
maybe.
I would rather position it, if it were me, I would position it for as many markets as it's suitable for, and let the customers figure out where it should go.
Yeah,
where they want it in their infrastructure.
There's also something to be said about focus, and this will provide that. So we shall see, as they say, right?
Yeah. Other chip news, Intel has formally said that the Knights Hill set of processors are dead.
They basically rearranged their roadmap a little bit, didn't they?
They did. And
I kind of liked what they did. I think that what they did was to say, good. Yeah, they said that, hey, instead of trying to push to get something at this time, maybe we can give ourselves another year and come with something that is way better.
Well, I always felt that the biggest competitor for their Knights product line, the Phi product line, was Xeon. And as Xeons get better and better and better, the gap between those two becomes narrower.
Mm-hmm.
And I think putting all of your wood behind the arrow, as Scott McNealy would say, in favor of Xeon is probably the right move. And that doesn't mean that they can't do other accelerator-type chips or massive core count type chips. It just means that they won't be doing this one anymore.
I see. Well, I don't doubt that they will continue to do a great job with Xeon.
Mm-hmm.
That is obviously the bloodstream of computing today.
Well, yeah, it's only 94.2% of everything on the top 500 list, for example.
Exactly.
It's a healthy market share.
Exactly. So Intel can look at their installed base and basically look at the whole market.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. So, and many of those really aren't high-end in AI and accelerators and this, that, and the other. So I'm sure they will continue to do a great job there. On the other hand, between AI and blockchain and cryptography and cybersecurity, there's a lot of opportunities to rethink how you're going to design these chips, and I think there's something to be said for doing that, and I believe that's what they're doing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that takes us to another big chip event, and that's the emergence of ARM.
True.
So ARM has been talking about getting into the server world for a number of years now, and this year was the first year I saw some tangible, credible moves that makes it pretty apparent that ARM and servers are going to happen. It's a reality. How much of that is because of technology is a little bit a question mark to me. I don't think they're doing that by some black and white evidence that makes them superior to Intel. I don't really see any of that. There are some minor things here and there, and over time they might be able to do this. But I think a lot of it is more because customers want an alternative, and ARM chip providers are starting to get there. So that includes Cavium with their Thunder X2 processor, which I believe is leading in the market there, and they're doing a very good job. And they signed up Cray as a system vendor, which I think is very, very credible. HPE also talked about ARM, but they've been talking about ARM for years and really not shipping much.
They've done a little bit, but I don't think the demand was there.
Well, okay, but my point is that the Cray announcement I take as a little bit more weighty than the HPE one.
Well, that's for a specific system as well.
That's right. And then Qualcomm is the other player there that they just showed up with their Centriq 2400 CPU, and that's the first server CPU that is using a 10 nanometer feature size in their fabrication, which obviously gives it a nice boost. But really nothing that Intel can't match. Give it another 6 months to a year or something.
Yeah, I'd really like to see benchmarks on that one.
Yeah, now
and some more details.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is that Qualcomm is really focused on cloud providers. So it's really optimized for single socket boards, just rack and stack them. And that may not be a bad way of doing it.
Webby kind of workloads and things like that, transaction processing. I think that makes sense.
That's right. I mean, they've talked about Google as a customer. So has IBM with Power 9, by the way.
Yep.
And then the next player is Applied Micro with their X-Gene 3 processor, which they talked about way back last March, and they would be shipping them by now. Mm-hmm. So more and more players starting to be a little bit credible, and I believe it's happening not for technology reasons, but for business reasons.
Interesting. I see the Cavium processor as being a real player. Looking over the specs of this, they've released the most information. This thing's got 132 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth versus 98 for Intel Sandy Lake. You can put a whole bunch of memory, up to 16 DIMMs per socket, on this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are leading in this market right now, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think you're right. So what else happened?
So the other thing that I saw a lot of was liquid cooling.
Mm-hmm.
Back in SC17, the year before, there was a whole bunch of liquid cooling on the floor, and it was starting to emerge. Our colleague Steve Campbell wrote a whole big paper about it on HPC Wire that was pretty well received, and has a whole table of all the players there. SC17, I saw more of them, and I saw them showing up in more booths. Mm-hmm. Other system vendors were starting to show their liquid cooling systems. The leaders there are, in my mind, CoolIT and Asetek. And of course, 3M is a big player there for
the immersive side.
For immersive stuff.
Saw a lot of 3M stuff on the floor.
Yeah.
And it's it's funny. It's been a long time coming. The first time I saw 3M on this stuff was 2009 in Portland.
When they came, yeah, right. Now, so the history of it with 3M is the Cray 2 supercomputer way back when that had the floor inert fluid, and Seymour designed the waterfalls design. So the boards were immersed, and the fluid would be pumped up and then poured over this ledge. Yes. And it was just a beautiful system. And of course, if
the waterfall system.
The waterfall system. So if you're spending $35 million for a system, that's a pretty good thing to have. And then they kind of went away, and then they came back recently, like you're saying, starting 2009.
Well, you didn't need them. I mean, that
you didn't
was
need
the
them.
thing.
That's right. That's right.
Once the bipolar chips went away, the heat came way down with modern microprocessors, and you just didn't need it.
Yeah,
but
you're right.
Now you do.
Now it's all the density, and if you want to pack them, you don't have to take the heat out. One other thing happened that was interesting is quantum computing. We mentioned earlier that IBM is getting into that, and of course they're one of the promising players there. They had new systems with a prototype with something like 50 qubits. Mm-hmm. So they're marching forward. D-Wave continues to be the leader in that market. They announced a sale to Toyota. Volkswagen had also bought one of their systems earlier. The Toyota system is keeping track of a lot of, it's basically a bunch of IoT data. They're keeping track of all the, taxis and cars and such.
Of all the data coming off of those?
Yeah, and I don't exactly know what the real application is, but there is a bit more information on that system coming out just about now.
Well, it's got to be something along the lines of putting all that data together and pulling some usable data out of it, some usable conclusions out of it, because I don't think you'd buy something like that as a collection repository.
Well, I think there are maybe two categories of buyers for quantum computers right now. One is obviously the classified work, and the imperative that you need to keep track of the sort of tools that might be available. And then the second are the people who really see that as an important thing in the future and have the wherewithal to start experimenting with it. And that's people like Google and Volkswagen and Toyota. And
that makes sense.
And then, of course, you've got the research institutions. If you look at who's all doing it, obviously there's IBM, there is D-Wave in Canada, there is Rigetti out of Berkeley, California. Then there is Chinese Academy of Sciences. There is Microsoft. Google has its own project in there.
Well, Google's got their feet in a couple of camps.
Basically any camp you can think of.
Yeah. Well, you're Google. You need to be there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that is nice is that these quantum computers are starting to look like coprocessors for actual supercomputers.
That usage model makes a lot of sense to me, because you're going to need this thing to be surrounded by some serious iron in order to feed it.
Exactly. Now, the whole thing is really early days, and a lot of progress is happening really fast. Obviously, because quantum computers are really good at optimization and figuring out, going through billions of possibilities and finding the one with the lowest energy, it is leading to a few buzzwords that we should cover. One is Y2K, Y2Q.
And what does that mean?
Y2Q is years to quantum.
Years
so how many
to
years
true
are we
quantum.
away from true quantum? Yeah. The next buzzword is quantum supremacy, and that's when quantum computers are faster than traditional computers, and that's not the case today. And then the third one is quantum safe cryptography.
I'd be interested in that.
Yeah, so the idea is that with quantum computers, you can crack all the codes that traditional computers can't, and can you come up with safely encrypting things that are immune from quantum computers. So that has led to a big branch of technology and research called quantum safe cryptography. It's been going on for years, by the way. There, University of Stuttgart, University of Illinois, a bunch of other places around the world have been doing research in it. Whole books have been written about it. But it is starting to become noticed in a big way.
Very interesting stuff. It was a great event, well attended. I haven't heard the attendance numbers, but I would imagine, at least to me, it looked like this might have broken a record.
I thought so too.
But great stuff, and you're right, we probably should have done this as a preview, then we would be looking astonishingly prophetic. But at least we got our wrap-up done. We're still in the same calendar year as SC. So I'm going to call that a win.
It's a huge win.
So thank you very much, Shahin, and thank you everybody for listening, and we'll be back at you again soon with another OrionX download.